Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a wonderful program in store for you all tonight. It's wonderful to see the high reception for this program. We're very glad you're all here. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is George. I'm the head of programs here at the History Center, and I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's program featuring author Scott Powell, titled Tradition Meets Modernity, The Chicago Area Interiors of Frances Adler Elkins. Thank you again for being here. I want to give a special thank you to Marcy and Laura at Lake Forest Preservation Foundation. This is a co-sponsored program with the Preservation Foundation, and it's always a pleasure to work with both of them and bring programs like these to you all this evening. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Laura Luce from Lake Forest Preservation Foundation.
Glasses. Okay. Well, thank you, Scott, for joining us tonight in Lake Forest. And this is, of course, the most important stop. So since 2002, Scott Powell has been researching the career of Frances Elkins. He has documented over 250 Elkins commissions, many of them previously unknown. His research includes close contact with existing Elkins family members and clients, ongoing review of her project files, and several photo archives throughout the U.S., and visits to extant Elkins commissions on the West Coast. His interest in Elkins has also led to the acquisition of furniture, textiles, wall coverings, and many unpublished period photographs related to her 35-year career. Studying Elkins combines his interests in classical and modern architecture, interior design, landscape design, photography, California history, Hollywood's two golden ages, the silent era and the first 3 decades of sound film, and textiles. He has worked as a radio producer, creating and co-producing the international radio series If You Love This Planet, hosted by Helen Caldicott. He was a contributing writer to 2 books by Dr. Caldicott, If You Love This Planet and The New Nuclear Danger, and has written articles for The Advocate magazine. Scott Powell was born in Palo Alto and raised on the San Francisco Peninsula and on Monterey Bay. He studied journalism at San Francisco State University and City College of San Francisco, followed by extensive coursework in the interior design program at UC Berkeley Extension, including the Antiques and Decorative Arts class offered by Professor Malcolm Gutter. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. It's great to be here, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I wrote this book on Frances Elkins, and I'd only seen David Adler's house, the Adler Center in Libertyville, but I hadn't seen any of these country houses till June when I spoke at Castle Hill in Ipswich, Massachusetts. So it was really mind-blowing to see some of these houses in person. Today I saw the Mrs. J. Ogden Armour house and the exteriors of some of these other Adler houses. So no photos can really, give you the full experience. And of course, many of you live in the houses, you've seen them. So anyway, I'm really excited to be here in Lake Forest and share what I know. I know a little bit about a lot of things you could say, but there's experts on architecture and so many aspects of her career right here in this room. So I decided to just show her work, except for her home in Monterey, just show her work in Chicago and the North Shore so that we maximize the experience of seeing some of these rare images. So as we're talking, I'll talk about some of the elements of her style rather than doing a preamble. We should just move right into the images. So this title page shows a chinoiserie wall design for the master bathroom in the Edison Dick House in Lake Bluff, designed by David Adler about 1931, decorated in the mid-30s. And Frances loved Asian motifs. She spent winter 1922-23 in China and Japan as her marriage was breaking up. So she liked things from the Orient and also the European kind of fanciful chinoiserie motifs. So these are 2 views of Frances Elkins. On the left is a painting of her in sort of Gainsborough style, circa 1905 when she was 18. I don't know what happened to the painting, but probably a Milwaukee Society painter. On the right is maybe 20 years later when she's a well-known interior designer in California. The portrait from about 1926 is by the great Chicago photographer Eugene Hutchinson. He took the well-known photo of David Adler with a mustache, which has been in several books, but the David Adler photo and a photo of his wife, Catherine Keith Adler, were in Town and Country in 1925-26. One of the themes about and the career of Frances Elkins is how many great photographers captured her rooms. No other interior designer came close. So a few other views of Frances, the famous painting of her, which hung in her house in Monterey by her friend Jean McCormick, 2 passport photos, 1918, 1925, Frances in her office in Monterey, 1940, and 1938 photos selecting the china for the Yerba Buena Women's Clubhouse in San Francisco. This is David Adler, and a photo of the Crane Estate, Castle Hill, his largest project in Ipswich. I was just there in June, and it's often said architects resemble their buildings, and you can see his classical profile and the front facade of that building. She also worked quite often with San Francisco architect Gardner Dailey. In fact, they did twice as many projects as she did with Adler, maybe 40 houses. And he did traditional homes and later moved into modernism. So he's shown in a photo by another great photographer, Yusuf Karsh, and his Elkins decorated living room and Telegraph Hill in San Francisco. On the upper right, the model for his house, international style model for his house in San Francisco. Lower right, a house he designed in Hillsborough. Now, Frances, as many of you know, spent a lot of time in Europe traveling with her brother, David Adler. He studied at the École des Beaux-Arts, architecture at the École des Beaux-Arts 1908 to 1911. But she was also doing a lot of her own self-education. Like Adler, she had a vast library of books about classical architecture, interior design, textiles, art. So this is just one of her books. And she kept all these scrapbooks throughout her career. So she was clipping from American, French, English magazines, houses, gardens, traditional, modern. So she was really keeping up with what was happening and, of course, was able to see a lot of these things in person. Another spread from her scrapbook. Now, she was also a prolific furniture and fabric designer. Dorothy Liebes, who's the subject of a new book, a great weaver, American weaver, called A Dark, a Light, and a Bright. And I encourage you to see the exhibit called about Dorothy Liebes at the Cooper Hewitt in New York till February 4th. But Dorothy Liebes said, in 1947, she told Upholstering magazine, you've got to have Frances write an article. She's one of the best furniture designers in the country. So top row left is a club chair she designed for a library in Hillsborough, 1936. A Shell table lamp inspired by her friend Jean-Michel Franck. More about him later in the middle. And then a cylindrical, crackled blue glass table lamp that she had made by Salviati in Murano in Venice. On the lower row is some cabin crafts bedspreads, chenille bedspreads that she designed, which were made in Georgia in the 40s. Okay, so Frances's background, she grew up in a very wealthy neighborhood, street of grand mansions, Prospect Avenue, Milwaukee. Most of these wonderful homes are gone, but there's a lot of architectural diversity. In the summer, there'd be a canopy of Dutch elm trees over the street. These are just a few of the houses there, and if you're interested, you can watch John Eastberg's 2-hour lecture about Prospect Avenue mansions in Milwaukee, another lecture he did on Grand Avenue mansions on YouTube. These are just some of the houses around her on the lower left, the Adler family homes on Prospect Avenue. Center bottom, the still standing Emanuel Adler house on Prospect Avenue, and that was her uncle's house. So the Adler family business was clothing, men's clothing. They started out making Civil War uniforms. Her grandfather came from Germany, and then Frances's father took over the company. By the early 1900s, they were doing very smart men's collegiate clothing, and that was the Adler family factory in Milwaukee. So this is David Adler on the left, Frances on the right, about 1905 in the shores of Lake Michigan, around the time they were traveling together. But Frances, in 1916, she met Fulton Elkins from a wealthy Philadelphia family, railroad fortune. The Elkins name in Philadelphia is like the Astor name in New York. But he was living in California by the age of 13 after his father and grandfather died. His maternal grandfather was a California senator. So she moved to California in 1918, and they were married for 3 years. The marriage fell apart. He ran off with another woman. But Frances continued her travels to Europe. By the way, she had gone to boarding school in France, Italy, and Switzerland, studied art, probably when she was like 12 to 18. So these are some of her favorite places in Europe. She had a villa in Biarritz in the 20s, a palazzo in Venice, 20s, 30s, 40s, early 50s. And as I said, she was in China and Japan. So Frances and Felton, when they were married, they lived all over the place. San Francisco, they had a house in Hillsborough. Frances saw this dilapidated 1834 Monterey adobe and thought this would be a great house to fix up. So this was purchased as their summer home. Felton Elkins played polo, and they wanted to be in Monterey to play polo. So David Adler would work with his sister to restore the house, and by 1920 it was beautifully decorated inside, and this is the front elevation, but in Frances's time, this is a 1969 photo, she kept the front of the house distressed, crumbling, so that as you walked in, you'd be really dazzled by what she did with the interiors. This is the sala or living room, and a rare color photo when she was alive. Most photos of this room are taken decades later when a lot of the rugs were gone, the men's club had upholstered a lot of the furniture, but this is the original decor about 1950. So she used beautiful French, English, antiques, Chinese rugs, Chinese porcelains, beautiful blue and yellow color scheme. Boston Globe writer came to the house in 1947. He said she had a collection of antiques which would make a connoisseur weep. David Adler took this old, adobe walls, and he put in the door frames, the dentile cornice, the mantle, and gave it a more classical feeling, but it still has kind of a rustic, kind of cozy ambiance. It's not too stiff. And he brought a lot of his polo playing friends into the house, and then she got to know a lot of the Pebble Beach people who became her clients. So this is some detailed shots of the needlepoint chair. A Chinese vase uses a lamp, and Jean-Michel Franck, that French modernist designer, designed the leather coffee table lower right, which would probably be worth $500,000 now. So that's still in the living room. This is the dining room, a 1983 photo taken by another great photographer, Fred Lyon, and with Frances's china, those little beaded trees, red trees on the table were designed by Misia Sert, patron of the Ballet Russe and friend of Coco Chanel. Frances used those in several projects, as you'll see. But that's pretty much as the room looked when Frances was alive. David Adler added this solarium in 1945 at the rear of Casa Amesti. Frances used one of her favorite color schemes, blue and white. The rope lamp or spiral lamp on the left was designed by Frances Elkins after a Jean-Michel Franck design. Peking rug, blue and white resist fabric. Williamsburg Raleigh Tavern was the pattern. This is Frances's bedroom. She had this canopy bed with a fishnet canopy with ball fringe, and she loved shell pink, and you can see her bed linens. This was painted by Mark Hampton from a photo by another great photographer, André Cortège. And on the ceiling is a shell-form plaster lamp by Jean-Michel Franck, and then on the walls, shell light fixtures, also by Franck. So here you can see how she's taking what looks a little traditional and making things simpler, more modern. House and Garden in 1945 said this room has a strawberries and cream quality because of the whites, the pinks, the reds. So this is brother David Adler's bedroom. He would come to visit Frances quite often. Lower right, 1934 photo, everything original. The room was done in blue, yellow, and white. You can see some detail shots of the bed canopy as it looks today, a little dressing table and a niche. Monuments of Paris, blue and white wallpaper. Frances and David both loved Paris. This is one of the two guest bedrooms downstairs, and I'll show what looks like in color in the next shot. Red and white French Provençal fabric, red and white toile de jouy on the beds. This is a 1950 slide by the Los Angeles artist Tony Duquette, where you can see how it looked in color. Tony Duquette designed those two wall sculptures or maquettes on either side of that little cabinet. And Frances took the fabric from the other guest room, a bolder toile de jouy, and she put it as the lining in that little cabinet you can see there. So let's go to some of her Chicago area interiors. David Adler's first project when he returned from the École des Beaux-Arts was his uncle Charles Stonehill house in Glencoe. Fortunately, the house was torn down in 1961. This is one of the last photos of the building, about 1961-62. French style. This is the inside of the house. There's two girls on the staircase. Frances's great-grand cousin, Susan Schreiber Mandel, maybe some of you know her, divides her time between Highland Park and here. She's on the staircase. And then this is one of the postcards that the Stonehills would give to friends, showing the early decor. Frances definitely worked on this house by the late 20s, but she may have worked with Adler before she was officially decorated in 1921 on these interiors. This is the Jesse Strauss house in Highland Park. This is a beautiful black and white snow winter scene. This is the dining room with a lot of beautiful French provincial furniture. I had this painting commission with the original curtains. Many of you have seen photos of this room with as it looked in the 60s, but these are the original curtains. Of course, the Strausses had a large collection of copper, which you can see here. And this is David Adler's own house in Libertyville. He took a 19th century farmhouse and expanded it over a couple decades. This is the living room as it looked in the 1920s. Frances asked for Town and Country to give her the photos that were published in 1925. When she wrote to them in 1952, they didn't have them, but she was definitely wanted to keep a record of working with her brother on this house. This is the original dining room. Frances's grandson donated back David Adler's dining table and chairs about 10, 15 years ago. Beautiful scenic wallpaper, very simple, Delft tile. This is Mrs. Adler's sitting room at the house. And you can just see it's traditional, and there's hooked rugs, which Frances loves, some chintz on the chairs, and the curtains have some lace and fringe, which is interesting. Frances used that a lot. So later, Frances redecorated the house about 1941. This is the library, I believe. Coromandel screen, low leather table by Jean-Michel Franck, and that Kuan Yin or Buddha figure on the left came from the Robert Mandel house. It was used there in the 1920s. And the shell-formed ceiling light fixture, and then this modernist sort of, I think, Giacometti over the door in the background, little sculpture. And then the next shot is a rare view of David Adler's own bedroom. He died in this bed in his sleep in 1949. A candlewick bedspread by the Bates Company. Very traditional. You can see even, later in life, he's still has this that looks like kind of a Victorian bedroom. This is the William McCormick Blair house in Lake Bluff. Nice color photo for House and Garden, 1983. The beautiful wood-paneled entrance gallery with engravings inset into the wall. I think Chicago scenes and Currier and Ives. Colonial-type light fixtures. Rare view, color view also from 1983 for House and Garden of the Pine Room with its original rug, original furniture, and on the right, the living room. This is a recent photo. The living room still has its original curtains and valances. This fabric is Lee Joffa hollyhock, which Frances used in several jobs. You'll see it in another one at Shore Acres, another room at Shore Acres. This is the dining room as it looked in the 1960s, the original paint color, blue and white tile, a portrait of the Blair's daughter, Helen, who died, I think, in a hunting accident. On the right is some scenic wallpaper that's still there, still in the dining room. This is the master bedroom with these canopy beds. This red and white toile de Jouy fabric was also used in the other guest bedroom at Casa Amesti, which I didn't show you, but I mentioned the fabric. This is the beautiful sun porch at the Blair house, which is, so one of the elements of Frances's style was just things were very uncluttered, a lot of simplicity, inviting sense of comfort. So she would take even the most formal rooms and do something to kind of bring things down a level. And you can see how these little planters, tables on the left are, very rustic and interesting pattern on the floor, these very simple lanterns. Now this is the Albert Lasker house in Lake Forest, and Ezra Stoller color photo, another great photographer. This house is awaiting someone to transform it, restore it. This is the beautiful paneled living room in a 1942 shot for Vogue magazine. So one of the things Frances would do was take what looks like a very traditional interior, and she would sneak in some modernist things, make people more comfortable with modernism. On the lower left, there's a mirrored table by the French designer Serge Roche. On the bottom, on the lower left, there's a little Jean-Michel Franck waterfall table. Also, she's mixing textures and patterns. That's something else she was very good with. Chairs. There's damask on the right. On the chair on the left has a blue linen on it. There's chintz. There's just simple brown leather. She also liked these simple color schemes, so it's just blue, yellow, and a little bit of white. And Chinese rugs, these tall tea canister lamps that she bought from Marshall Field. This is the dining room, as it looked also in 1942. The wallpaper it's now available for sale, a well-known authority on historic wallpaper, has been taking it to shows all over the world. And Mr. Lasker and his third wife would hire Frances Elkins for New York apartment. They'd reuse those dining chairs, cover them in pale gray leather. This is the sun porch in the Lasker house, done in beautiful blues and yellows. And I could show you the color photo, but I think the black and white's more compelling. Notice the interesting lambrequins over the windows. And this is the library as it looked in the 1920s. And this beautiful oval ceiling and chandelier, more traditional furniture. And here Frances has refreshed the room by the late 30s. The chandelier's still there, but she's added Jean-Michel Franck table lamps and this modern, a little more contemporary feeling with the chintz-covered sofas and these burgundy throw pillows. This is Mr. Lasker's bedroom. Again, you see very simple color scheme and beautiful paneling. That's something you see in a lot of Adler houses, as you know, is the paneling. French provincial chest, but on the French provincial chest are two lamps designed by Alberto Giacometti, modernist lamps for Jean-Michel Franck. This is Shore Acres in a 1920s photo, the Shore Acres Club in Lake Bluff. And this is the living room, of course, has a north and south section. But the room was painted green, and I believe the inspiration was the belfry bedroom at Beauport, which you see in the lower right. And that had a wallpaper, scenic wallpaper called Décor Chinois from the French company Zuber, and Frances used it on the walls in this room. And then you can see she used that Lee Joffa hollyhock fabric on the quilted sofa and chair, and then for a little pizzazz, she had bold red leather on the leather sofa, leather chairs, just for some interesting contrast. This is the other side of the living room at Shore Acres, where you can see a close-up of that scenic wallpaper, Décor Chinois. This is the dining room at Shore Acres, and period descriptions say that the paneled walls were painted yellow. I don't know what color the curtains were. I'm guessing green or blue, but I just put a little strip of painted yellow paneling to give you a sense of that room. So now we move on to the Robert Mandel House in Highland Park. This is a color stereo view from the mid-30s when the Mandels were still living here. Beautiful, unexpected bright yellow patio furniture on the outside. The house is kind of, aged a little bit, covered with ivy, very charming. This is the entrance hall, which was recently restored. The whole house has a very French feeling. Another scenic wallpaper, I don't remember the design, and then the French chandelier upper right. This is the powder room, and Frances was really brilliant, and David Adler, at creating beautiful powder rooms, bathrooms. So this is an early glam 1928 bathroom. The light fixture was from a company called Maison Baguez, beaded light fixture, so I have a color photo here of a similar light fixture in Mrs. Zellerbach's bedroom in San Francisco. Lower right is one of those beaded tree decorations by Misia Serret, which Frances put on brackets on the wall. The seating in the powder room was silvered. Frances liked to silver furniture. This is the main gallery in the Mandel House. Beautiful Parquet de Versailles floors, pale boiserie on the walls, several seating groups. What kind of makes this room more approachable is that a lot of the upholstery was just a simple linen, nothing too fancy. So it takes away that what would have felt like maybe kind of a stiff period room, which were popular in the 1920s, but makes it just something more contemporary. Another side of the living room with this campaign furniture uses a little game group, leather-covered chairs, and you can see that Buddha figure or Kuan Yin figure in the background, which was later in Adler's house. Now, Frances used a lot of zebra rugs, they're kind of dramatic, but she not only used real zebra rugs, she had company which would make giant imitation rugs, and you can see one of those zebra rugs here. This is the living room, another beautifully paneled room. A lot of the, Adler and Elkins, especially Adler, was acquiring a lot of paneling from European houses. Of course, he was also producing designing a lot of paneling himself based on these antique boiserie. But here the room had colors like burgundy curtains, yellow sofa, a portrait of Mrs. Mandel in the back. So lots of different antiques, different rugs, things going on, but still doesn't feel too crowded, too cluttered. This is the dining room, beautiful Chinese wallpaper. A few years later, Frances would add a dark brown French provincial buffet on the left there where she's got that pale wood going on. And this room, I understand, still has the original wallpaper, and the present owners are doing a great job to kind of maintain the original decor. This is Mrs. Mandel's bedroom, and you can see how well Frances could do these simple color schemes, just the blue, the creams, a little bit of red, but that's the actual fabric that was used, the rose chintz on some of the materials. But as you see how refreshing that blue looks with that pale green painted walls and simple curtains. In black and white, this would probably look kind of stiff, but it looks very fresh in color. This is Mr. Mandel's bedroom. Again, Frances using a plain fabric, a strié fabric on some of the chairs, and then this floral fabric on the bed and the window hangings. And then this interesting soft green for the carpeting, which was used in a lot of the house. This is the upstairs gallery with a lot of more beautiful French provincial furniture, several patterns going on, these cabinets with a lot of Chinese porcelains and Blanc de Chine, etc. But one of these cabinets actually held a secret door into one of the guest bedrooms. Here's the guest bedrooms. Again, that red toile de Jouy, similar to fabric Frances used in many jobs, but then she's giving it a little color contrast with some blue Chinese porcelains on the mantle there, and a very simple pewter lamp on the little table there. This is the sun porch with several different patterns going on, but it still doesn't look too busy. The only color that I know for sure is a blue and white resist fabric over on the left, but this would have been, I'm sure, a lovely room in color. Now we move to Chicago. Mrs. Charles Goodspeed was an arts patron. She had a lot of famous people in her apartment, including Picasso, etc. So David Adler fitted out did the interior architecture for this apartment, and Frances did the decor about 1927. This is the spruce paneled living room, and this is on Lincoln Park, by the way, and the room had a lot of pale colors in the upholstery, a lot of beautiful Chinese antiques. And on the right is a portrait of Mrs. Goodspeed by the great artist Bernard Boutet de Monvel. There was a book about him recently. This is another view of the living room with a beautiful federal fireplace, comfortable seating, and more of the Asian antiques and English mirrors. And this is the wonderful dining room, which had another thing Frances did a lot was to make sure there was value contrast, dark and light. So you can see that ebonized wood floor with a beautiful metal inlay, and the pilasters on the walls have these nice little silver capitals, and then these very simple Waterford glass light fixtures. Another view of the dining room on the right, another portrait of Mrs. Goodspeed. This is another silvered room, silver tea paper walls. This is Mrs. Ely's bedroom, and then the curtains are pale green. The chest in the center is silver, then there's another tiny chest on top of it, also silvered, and the chairs are silver, then background for a little value contrast, 2 chairs covered in black leather, and then Mrs. Ely's bed from her Lake Bluff house, and pale green bedspread on the right. So this is the Joseph Ryerson Jr. house in Chicago. David Adler designed this in the early 1920s. Chicago Tribune in the mid-30s said this was the most beautiful house in Chicago. So, originally decorated in a very traditional manner. I don't know for sure, but I think Frances had a hand in these rooms. These are some period photos owned by David Adler of the downstairs hallway and living room. But then, about 1930, Frances became familiar with this French modernist designer, furniture designer, interior designer, Jean-Michel Franck. And he, along with David Adler, were probably the biggest influences on her sensibility. David Adler, the more classical, traditional, Jean-Michel Franck, the more spare, modern, austere kind of luxury. This is an exhibit of furniture owned by Yves Saint Laurent, Jean-Michel Franck furniture owned by Yves Saint Laurent. So we start to see the Jean-Michel Franck influence in the Ryerson's penthouse library. Mr. Ryerson had this library added to the roof of the house, to the top of the house in 1930. He had a lot of collection of Chicago memorabilia. So here Frances is designed a sofa and chairs after Jean-Michel Franck design, low coffee table based on his work, Jean-Michel Franck type lamps, again those big zebra rugs, and then David Adler inserted little strips of metal all along the walls, little banding. And this is another view of the penthouse. I wish I could find these original photos. These are from Townsfolk magazine, which James Sheeran told me to check out, and I perused several issues at the Chicago History Museum. So we go back to 1301 Astor Street. This is the Potter Palmer Jr.'s apartment, decorated about 1929, 1930 by Frances. This is a Xerox copy of an original photo, but this room had very tall ceilings. Again, David Adler did the interior architecture. The upholstery, very soft beiges and browns, and then these beautiful chandeliers. There were 2 fireplaces in the room, and these wonderful curtain treatment. And then inset into the walls are these shelves with a collection of a lot of beautiful blue Chinese porcelains. So now this is one of the David Adler row houses in Chicago and Lakeview, built in the 1920s. This was originally the Mrs. Arthur Ryerson house, Titanic survivor. Ask me later about all the Titanic connections of Frances Elkins. But the Wolcott Blairs bought this house in 1930 and had Frances decorated it. This is the living room with beautiful pale green walls, these Chinese murals inset above the fireplace, a lot of English antiques, Queen Anne mirrors, of course, a lot of Asian pieces, Asian porcelains. And this is the famous dining room, and the rug was designed by the San Francisco-born artist Marion Dorn, who was in London by the 1930s, cut pile chenille rugs and these geometric designs, and you see these in several David Adler, Frances Elkins projects. Siri Mom, English decorator, supplied the mirrored screen on the left. Now, the Wolcott Blairs moved to Palm Beach in 1936, and this dining room was exactly recreated, reinstalled in the Palm Beach house. The same architecture, same curtains, same everything. And this has happened actually with several Frances Elkins rooms. The owners liked them so much they just moved everything lock, stock, and barrel into another house. This is the Mrs. Kersey Coates Reed house in Lake Forest. Many of you familiar with this house. It's considered the penultimate Frances Elkins David Adler collaboration. The sort of subdued exterior with the Pennsylvania fieldstone, I believe it's called. This is the wonderful gallery, this high value contrast, the black and white floors, the leather on the sofa on the left, the white leather on the left, the black leather on the right, the coach lamps, simple Waterford chandeliers, just very dramatic, and it leads into this, on either side of this where there's north and south galleries, little seating areas. And then this is the famous stair hall. Again, this strong value contrast, beautiful staircase, which you've seen on the cover of the David Adler book, 2002 Art Institute book, this beautiful Steuben glass balusters, Moroccan glass runner. And here's a room that Jean-Michel Franck designed in Paris for Frances David, and it was tested out there and then reinstalled here in Lake Forest. The room was originally, everything was white on white, white upholstery. Frances wrote on the back of this photo, white this, white that. The leather club chairs are what Jean-Michel Franck called the comfortable chair. These club chairs, a little windmill, table lamps by Franck. Paul Rotocanacci, another designer in Jean-Michel Franck's studio, designed the little bench there at the dressing table. Alberto Giacometti designed those wall sconces, and this is a variation of a hand holding a bowl, and you see this in several Frances Elkins projects. On the right, above the fireplace, is a bas-relief by Alberto Giacometti. But then, for big contrast, the ladies' dressing room in the Reed house, much more sumptuous, feminine, but again, the traditional and the modern. The chairs look like, some old wing chairs, but Frances has silvered them, given this wonderful treatment with the quilted upholstery and the gray fringe, and then the dramatic black floor, the mirrored paneling, the Belection framing around and everything, the silvered fireplace, quite an elegant space. And this is the living room. This is some rare colorized stereo views from the 1930s were found after my book was put together, again, thanks to James Sheeran. But this is the living room. Again, it looks very traditional, but there's a simplicity about it, which you wouldn't probably see in a lot of rooms. And Frances is, again, given this nice color mixing in the brown and the upholstery and the brown and the rugs, but she's got soft grays leather in the chairs, and then these bright green benches, and then green Chinese porcelains above the fireplace. This is the famous Reed Library. Mark Hampton, New York decorator, popular in the 1980s, said this was the most boldly stylish room in America that he'd ever seen, and he wrote about it in a book called Legendary Decorators of the 20th Century. So Hermès leather goatskin on the walls. Jean-Michel Franck designed the club chair in the center, designed that table lamp. Then there's some English antiques. Jean-Michel Franck also designed some mica low coffee tables, and Frances designed those two game chairs, which she called spider chairs with the shepherd's crook arms. And she had those rugs bleached, Carabao rugs bleached just to blend in with the scheme. This is a colorized stereo view of the dining room, beautiful 18th century Chinese wallpaper from England. Very simple Chinese Chippendale chairs, which kind of brings it down a notch, makes it a little more down home. Another beautiful cut pile rug by Marion Dorn. You see the high value contrast. You know, the walls are kind of lighter and brighter, and then you've got this dark ground in the furniture and in the rug. And this is Mrs. Reed's bedroom, another colorized stereo view. And if you saw this room in black and white, you certainly wouldn't expect to see this bright aqua color on the wing chairs by the fireplace, and then that's actually her bed there on the right in a lilies of the field quilted fabric. This is the daughter's bedroom, Mary Reed's bedroom. This is a chinoiserie kind of bed from Siri Mom again, and the crown of the bed is repeated in the lambrequin, the carved lambrequin at the above the curtains, and these large tassels hanging on the fabric there, and then another simple color scheme with the blues and yellows. And the more 18th century Chinese wallpaper. This is the famous ivory guest bedroom in the Reed house, 15-foot ceilings, silver tea paper on the walls, these wonderful canopy beds, Russian tapestries used as carpet, and antique crewel work bedspreads, Maison Baguette, who often made light fixtures for France's Paris company, did these beaded wall lights. Queen Anne mirror above the mantle, and then Frances and Siri Mom were both kind of fringe queens. They love to use fringe. So you see a nice moss fringe on this wing chair. This is the Edison Dick house, and this is a Greek revival house designed by David Adler about 1931 in Lake Forest. So on the exterior is a Greek key design. You can't see it very well here, but it was repeated throughout the house. Here's the powder room. You can see the round rug has that design. The door panel has that design. Very simple, very elegant, very classical powder room. This is the living room, and this had brilliant gold curtains with blue fringe, and I now believe the upholstery fabric was blue and white. It has this coil striped pattern, but overlaid on top of that is a nautilus shell design. So again, she's added some dark things. You can see those dark leather chairs, those black Toll tea canister lamps on black mahogany wine barrels used as tables. So again, she's able to just balance and ground the values in light and dark. That's one of her gifts. So this is the dining room. These are from two stereo views, blue and white fabric at the curtains. Some wonderful English antiques, but very simple, very simple. There's not a lot of art on the walls. This is the master bedroom in the Dick house, blue and white fabric on the chairs and blue and white fabric on the walls. And then these are just some detail shots. There's that red and white toile de Jouy used in two beds in a guest room, and that photo was taken in Monterey. Frances would have furniture, upholstered curtains made in Monterey at the Robert Louis Stevenson house and have them photographed before they were shipped out to these various jobs. Lower left, another detail of the master bath with the chinoiserie design. And then on the lower right is a window with this lovely carved curtain design and painted wood. This is the Lester Armour house in Lake Bluff, 1969 photo from the History Center. Thank you very much. And this house, of course, appeared in Robert Altman's film A Wedding, and this is the entry hall. with this wonderful palm pilasters on the walls. Adler, of course, loved the star design. You can see it on the floor here. Several of the light fixtures in this house, I believe, were by the Caldwell Lighting Company. So here, this is a colorized stereo view of the gallery, this wonderful painting on the walls with lots of detail, palms and so forth. White leather on the benches, giving it kind of an art moderne feeling. That's probably a Caldwell light fixture above. And the living room was never photographed, unfortunately, but we just know it had celadon green walls and brown rugs and Jean-Michel Franck lamps mixed with a lot of beige and white chintz. This is the morning room, lovely paneling, chairs designed by Frances Elkins, Jean-Michel Franck lamps with unusual mica shades, beautiful antique, probably Victorian-era carpet. The dining room has another Marion Dord rug down below, simple leather-covered chairs, Coromandel screens, a favorite device of Frances Elkins, beautiful crystal chandelier. This is an actual color photograph, color stereo view, but not colorized as far as I know, it's actual color. This is the sun porch in the Wheeler house, a very simple blue and white scheme, these kind of Chinese Chippendale chairs, Moroccan rugs. Frances would travel to Morocco. She liked to buy these rugs every year. And low Jean-Michel Franck coffee table. This is the famous mirrored bathroom, which appears in A Wedding in a scene with Carol Burnett, and this is now in decorator Miles Redd's townhouse in New York, and James Sheeran once again was able to salvage this when a recent owner decided to remove this mirrored bathroom. This is some furniture from the game room in the Leicester Armour house designed by Frances Elkins, including these wonderful bar stools and some of the fabric samples from the room from the Elkins archives in Monterey. So Mrs. Kersey Coates-Reed's sister Laura was married to Charles Schweppe, and so the Schweppe mansion was decorated by Frances Elkins in 1936. There's some of the original patio furniture in this familiar 1961 Slim photo, which is usually printed backwards. This is the correct orientation. This is the hall curtains from the Schweppe house and blue and white quilted bed for Mr. Schweppe. We don't have period interior photos, but we have some of these furniture images. This is the Leicester Armour house. Just throw these images in last minute. They're not the best quality. This is a David Adler house designed in 1934. And I'll just show you these two images for contrast. They're both very familiar from other books. The living room with these wonderful carved lambrequins from England, and the dining room, which also had these wonderful carved lambrequins above the balance. And then those familiar, what they call loop chairs designed by Frances Elkins in the living room on the right, and those Giacometti planters on the left in the living room. You know, they can go for like $800,000 now. This is the beautiful, very simple stripped wood library in the Wheeler house, very classic room. These chairs are now in a bedroom at Castle Hill in Ipswich. And then this is another room where Frances used zebra rugs, and here she's used mounted. This actually, it's not an actual animal on the wall, that's a sculpture with the stag they used. This is the Mrs. J. Ogden Armour house, which is now for sale. Designed by David Adler in 1934, decorated from the mid to late 30s. Adler did this interesting device where he put wooden Venetian blinds outside the windows, so that probably didn't last very long, but it's an interesting sort of couture touch. And this is the entry hall. The present owners have recreated the Frances Elkins curtain treatments in this soft blue. This is a James Sheeran photo. In the living room, there's no period interior photos of this house, but that's the original sofa, and that's the original fabric, upper right, the original curtains and paint color from a 1960s photo, original rug, and a painting of Mrs. Armour, lower left. So to try to piece together what this house looked like is an ongoing detective project of mine. This is a image of an English Baroque boudoir from a 1930 magazine, and there was a craze for palms and shell motifs. So the winter garden at the Armour, the Mrs. J. Ogden Armour house, originally had pink walls, had these palm pilasters made by Angelo Andriel in New York. Jean-Michel Franck and Emilio Terry, who worked with him, designed these little tables, which are still in the room, and that's from Frances Elkins archives, the original drawings from Franck. And then this is one of the guest bedrooms with this lovely Chinese wallpaper. Those are the original curtains. On the right is a bed with artichoke finials in Frances's workshops in Monterey before it was shipped to Lake Forest for this bedroom. And this is the matching or coordinating bathroom in this Chinese bedroom, and this wall covering was hand painted. And then Frances loved these little mirrored dressing tables, as you see here. This is Mrs. Armour's tub with this lovely, the gilded shell sconces on either side, and all these little gilded terrazzo or something inset in the tub. This is some detailed shots from the Frances Elkins archives. Mrs. Armour's bedroom curtains, her silver dressing table, her silvered bedside table, her silver dressing table bench. So you can see it was quite glamorous. And then this is the Louis Kuppenheimer house, which is one of David Adler's last projects in the North Shore with Frances Elkins. Of course, this was a little bit outside of town, and and this is the original, when the house was in its original orientation with this copper roof. It was later moved across the street. Living room, the original fireplace, and one of those spider chairs Frances designed for the room. And then the game room downstairs, Frances, as I mentioned, prolific furniture designer, designed all these pieces here, and that's the original floor in the game room. So you can see she's going in a much more modernistic direction. This is the bedroom, capichel, bedside tables and dresser, and then that's Mrs. Kuppenheimer's chaise-longue. And then one little side note here, Frances knew the 4 real-life people who inspired the characters in The Great Gatsby, and the 2 women have a North Shore connection. Upper right, Ginevra King, who was a debutante at the same time as Edith Cummings, lower left, who became a well-known golfer. David Adler designed Ginevra's parents, the Charles King's house in Chicago. Upper left is George Gordon Moore, the inspiration for the Jay Gatsby character. He was a neighbor of Frances's in the 1920s in Carmel Valley and threw big splashy parties. Edith Cummings was the inspiration, by the way, so Ginevra was the inspiration for the Daisy Buchanan character, upper right. Lower left, Edith Cummings, the Fairway Flapper, inspiration for the Jordan Baker character. Frances and David were close friends with her, and Frances decorated her brother's house, the Dexter Cummings. And lower right, Tommy Hitchcock, the inspiration for the Tom Buchanan character. He and George Gordon Moore both played polo and were friends of Frances Elkins out on the West Coast. So this is the Charles King house in Chicago, which has been torn down, in a photo owned by David Adler. And this, I think the last project I'm showing you, this is the Lee Block House in Glencoe. I don't know who the architect was. It dates from the 1920s. Frances decorated the house first for the Gerhard Foreman and his wife, Mary Lasker, the son of Albert Lasker. And then she redecorated the house again in the late 30s, early 40s with Samuel Marks, Chicago architect and designer. The home was on the cover of 2 issues of House Beautiful. So you can see the very simple staircase, beautiful, unusual chandelier on the right, this wonderful blue tile. And here's the living room, but it has some fringe sofas designed by Frances Elkins and lamps and coffee table designed by Sam Marks, this wonderful Baroque plaster fireplace. This is the dining room, done with capichel walls, silvered chair in the background with this very busy frilled fabric, and then very simple kind of sober dining table and chairs, very unexpected, this wonderful swag curtain treatment, very elaborate chandelier. So it's mixing, I guess you could say, the very fussy, glamorous feminine with this, more austere masculine aesthetic. And then there's a wonderful floor lamp in the background, silvered floor lamp. This is Mrs. Block's bedroom. This is the same lilies of the valley fabric that was used in Mrs. Reed's bedroom, but here it's on the chaise-longue and chair, and then this wonderful mirrored fire surround, and the same kind of elaborate curtain treatment used in Mrs. Reed's bedroom in Lake Forest. And then this last photo shows the sun porch in the Lee Block house, decorated about 1940. The fabrics are by Dorothy Liebes. I encourage you to see the show, as I mentioned, in New York through February 4th at the Cooper Hewitt. Frances loved these antique French and Austrian fireplace stoves. And so you see one on the left there. Dorothy Liebes also designed the blinds there. Samuel Marks designed the coffee table, and the lamps. So you can see Frances her work has become much more simplified, and this room could be done today and look very modern. So I'll leave you with this quote. In 1947, she wrote an article, the only article she apparently ever wrote, a long article about Myron Oliver, who was an artist, who was the cabinet maker in charge of her furniture workshops, very skilled guy. And Frances believed very strongly in preserving the past and learning from the past, and I think that's one of the things that made her work so good. But she said, "It is one of my strongest convictions that to do any superior work in the arts and crafts, one must fill his eye with the great things, not in order to copy them, but to stimulate creative ability. I believe that is necessary in order to rise above a poor self-expression gained entirely from the study of one's contemporaries." And this is a photo of Frances in her office, taken about 1940, and that's a Matisse painting behind her. And she's probably wearing Chanel or Man Boucher. She used, both of those designers. Coco Chanel was a close friend. So anyway, I appreciate your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there's time. Oh, well, actually, and that's the Mrs. Carolyn Moore Seeley dining room, that silvered room in the Philip Maher Art Deco high-rise in Chicago. So the original cover of the book that which Rizzoli chose, and I had some input, was a red and white patio furniture at a Gardner Dailey house in Pebble Beach, and that was the cover of the book on Amazon for a year before the book came out, and then at the last minute they decided to use that photo. But I'm glad, because that was not in the layouts. There was a view looking into the dining room, but I thought, how can I work? I could only have 304 pages, so I'm glad that photo was able to be there, and I think it's a great detail shot. And that's one of the framed photos Frances had in her office. So again, I think she was very proud of that particular project with David Adler to do that apartment. Other questions?
When you say silver, what do you mean? Like gold leaf?
Yeah, like a gold leaf. Yeah, just give it. I don't know quite how it was done, but a lot of that furniture comes up for sale, and it's not like the silver has come off. It's still, so whatever coating or whatever she did to give it that silver finish, it was done quite well. Yes.
Does the Men's Club still own her house in Monterey?
They have I don't know exactly what the arrangement is. The National Trust, it's a National Trust project, so they can't change the exterior, but they're able to, I guess, lease it or use the facilities, and they've done a pretty good job maintaining some of the historic rooms upstairs. Her living room, the dining room, David Adler's bedroom, the upstairs hallway, and the library downstairs. So they used to have weekly tours. The Monterey History and Art Association would have weekly tours, but now, you just have to make a request to somebody to be able to see the house, which I highly recommend. It's quite impactful to be there in person. Other questions? Yes?
Did she ever remarry, and when did she die?
She died in 1953 in San Francisco, and her husband, as I said, was a philanderer. He ran off with Mrs. Lansing Tevis, the first woman in America to bob her hair, first society woman to bob her hair. So the little gossip, the Charlie Knickerbocker had a national column, and he wrote this long article about Felton Elkins, who was always in the society pages. When is Felton Elkins going to marry his mistress? And I think that was very humiliating to Frances. Anyway, and I've heard that one grandson says she never stopped loving him, the other one says she hated him. But I did hear, and this isn't in this book, but hopefully do a second book, that she did continue to date and, had an active romantic life. I'll leave it at that, so. But did not remarry, yeah, sorry. Laura.
Most of these dining rooms are enormous, and they're often photographed with these tiny little tables, and I'm wondering.
Oh, I've thought about that, like with the Reed dining room. It just seemed like this is sort of casual. Those chairs seem kind of Palm Beach and, whatever. So that's a good question. And maybe that's just to make things seem a little more free-flowing. And I guess some of these dining rooms had a breakfast area and the dining area. So that would be probably a good question for James Sheeran or Art Miller or some of these wonderful experts in the room. But I'll start pondering that. I'll think about that. Thank you. Well, one of the things is how prolific Frances Elkins was. In her time, she was probably number one. There was a decorator named Eleanor Brown, founded a firm named Macmillan, and she later said Frances Elkins was the only decorator that she admired. Sister Parrish, another great New York decorator, started out in 1933. She said, when I started, there was Elsie DeWolf in New York, Mrs. Elkins in California, and that was it. Those were the big names. But I think so many people hired Frances Elkins, and it wasn't known, and a lot of the magazine articles, they would just talk about the lady of the house, but she was a really, really big deal. And as I said, no other decorator came close to having as many famous photographers capture her room. So that she was so prolific and that she could be so busy doing like 40 projects at once and then go off to Europe for the summer, sending telegrams back to her office. She had 60 people working in her office in Monterey, people upholstering furniture upstairs, leading this active social life, entertaining the leaders of French society in Biarritz and hanging out with Salvador Dali and Coco Chanel, but yet she was able to, I think partly because of the family business, this huge empire of clothing stores, and I also had a men's hat company, that probably was maybe in her blood, but I think she had so much fun. She really enjoyed decorating. She worked with a lot of friends. People said, oh, she was a dictator, but she really wanted to please the client, and that was something that's very apparent in the project file correspondence. The client would push back, and then another thing I heard from both grandsons is that Frances would tell them, a client who couldn't afford something, no, just, you can pay me later, I just want the room to look right. And when she died, a lot of her clients hadn't paid for a lot of things, so she just wanted them to have it. She wanted the room to look right. So, and here's another little story, is that a woman came up to her in Monterey and said, I've seen your work in a magazine, we don't have a lot of money, my husband's a gas station attendant, could you give me some ideas? And Frances ended up doing their house for free. So, you wouldn't have expected that from, so I heard a lot of those kind of stories. Yes?
Besides the college in Monterey, does she have archives anywhere else?
The Dorothy Liebes Archives at the Archives of American Art, Dorothy Liebes Papers at the Archives of American Art in Washington, D.C. They have, of course, Dorothy Liebes fabrics, but mostly photos and letters, and so there's a lot related to Frances Elkins. There are some photos of her interiors that I used in my book, so that's one resource. And the David Adler Archives they don't have a lot of David Adler's correspondence with Frances Elkins, but her archives have some of that correspondence, which is great in illuminating, finally, what was their working and personal relationship. But it's mostly that archive in Monterey, and then photo archives everywhere have a lot of her stuff. But as far as actual documentation and papers and letters, it's mostly in Monterey. Yes?
You had mentioned Beauport, Henry Sleep.
Right.
He was before her.
Well, Beauport, I guess, opened 1922. David Adler, I think, visited in 1923. He signed the guest book. Felton Elkins, maybe around the time he divorced Frances, signed the guest book. So I think Adler must have seen it, and maybe Frances as well. And and she was clipping things from magazines if she didn't go there in person. But I think it was an influence.
Did he play any kind of influence on her?
Well, I'm just surmising from that belfry bedroom and Shore Acres, now that I know what the colors were, that it was probably an influence on her, and maybe some of the other rooms as well. But she traveled a lot in the U.S. as well, and she was, visiting. She wasn't just working with Adler and seeing her friends. She was constantly traveling, and Went to Mexico a lot in the 1940s. You know, she was spending a lot of time in Mexico. David Adler had a house in Mexico in the 1940s. Big estate that he was fixing up. So I don't have interior photos, but I have the floor plans of the furniture arrangements there. Yes?
I'm just curious, I noticed you incorporated a lot of Louis XV.
Yes.
But not Louis XVI.
Okay, well, a few clients like that. I think, again, she wanted to bring things down a little bit, and the softer curve. One thing you see a lot is things are not too square or they're not too round, the mixing the shapes. And then, as her grandson says, she wanted things to look a little down home. You'll see a chair on either side, a table on either side of two chairs. The tables don't match, but they're the same height. So she wanted things to look arbitrary, like, oh, let's just pull that table out of the attic. And so things are not too rigid. And I think maybe the Louis XVI was you know, she wanted things to look very comfortable. She liked to please the man first, who often paid the bill, but to have comfortable furniture that she would scale for. Maybe she'd have a his and hers chairs. So that was really important. Again, the inviting sense of comfort, and maybe the Louis XVI. In her own home, she had a house in Monterey, apartment in San Francisco, Carmel Valley House. She didn't seem to have any Louis XVI. So she loved the French provincial, which is not in fashion now, but I think it's quite wonderful, and because you know, it's just, again, a little more rustic, and you know, not so formal. Yes.
What would you say would be their most famous collaborations in this area and then outside of this area?
Okay, well, in this area, the Reed House, it was photographed a lot, which is great. It was photographed in the 1930s by a woman named Emily Danielson, another great photographer. Photographed in color. The grandson commissioned Louis Medina to do some photos while his grandmother was still alive, 1978. So, and the house, the interiors, furniture was there until, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. There was an auction, I think, 2006. So that was well known, but some of these other projects, I think if you could really see them in color, like Mrs. J. Ogden Armour's house with all the furniture and all the colors. The grandson said that house was so wonderful, it was so bright, all the bright colors, and, you know, very cheerful. So I think, so that would probably be their best known and best known collaboration, photograph collaboration here. And then in Monterey, David did this very simple house for the Paul Winslows, one-story house, just living room, dining room, 2 bedrooms, that was about it. And then also the Mrs. Kersey Coates Reed house, which is in my book, the second biggest David Adler project in 1931 in Hillsborough, California, another big English house like Castle Hill. So that decor, there's now documentation has emerged that Frances was the lead decorator on that. And I tried to show some of that house in my book. And Siri Mom did the famous bedroom, but I now think Frances and Siri worked together. So I think that one was another one where I tried to show some photos, and now color photos by Tony Duquette were found. So I'd like to play that house up more if I do a second book. Thank you. Great audience.
And once again, thank you to Lake Forest Preservation Foundation. Thank you, Scott, and thank you all for attending this evening.